Hello, everyone. Welcome to the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. We've got an interesting guest lined up for us this afternoon, Walking Through Walls, a memoir. It's a book by Philip Smith. He's here to chat with us about his life, his very extraordinary father, and the unusual circumstances that have surrounded him throughout his life. I think this is exactly what you, the listeners, will love to hear, a story like this. Thank you for joining us, Philip. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Dave, I'm delighted to be here.
There is so much. Usually I give a little bit more of an introduction, but I really don't want to give anything away. I just want to hear about you and have this story kind of unfold naturally as we discuss this. The book is out and available. As a matter of fact, for all of our listeners, go to darknessradio.com, click on the Killer Deals link. It'll take you into our Amazon page. You'll see the book there. You can buy them direct through that link. You'll be able to purchase and get them right through the Amazon page that we have set up, and it's all ready for you. Let's launch into this a little bit. And Philip, start off with a little bit about your story. Where did you grow up?
We grew up in Miami. My father and my mother had come down from New York in the 50s, and at the time he was an interior designer. High society. I mean, he worked for the president of Cuba, the president of Haiti, Dean Martin, Charlie Chaplin, Walt Disney. I mean, it was sort of a high jet set life at the time. And then it all changed. He suddenly discovered that he could talk to dead people and heal sick people, and our lives just radically changed almost overnight.
At what age did this enlightenment hit your father?
Well, the big earthquake was when I was around 14, but there was a steady climb. I mean, this is in the 50s, and there were no yoga studios. There was no yoga anything, and he was teaching himself yoga. And in fact, I was 6 or 7, and I went to school one day, and it was show and tell, and we had to talk about what our fathers did, our parents did. And I said, well, my father does yoga. And the teacher said, now what in the hell is yoga? Because that was the times back then. I mean, he was such a pioneer. And then from yoga, he got into macrobiotics and meditation. And, this is during the 60s. The Beatles went to India. And it was pretty radical at the time, and he was definitely, let's say, a weirdo, but a wonderful, enlightened weirdo. And then from there, he just started. Little by little, things came into play, and he became this healer. He had read about Edgar Cayce, and in fact, Edgar Cayce's son, Hewlin Cayce, became friends with my father and would come stay with us during the winter. But he really wanted to find a way to help people, and he was into homeopathy. I mean, when I was a kid, I didn't go to doctors. He would take out these brown heavy glass bottles, and he would treat me with homeopathy. And all the kids were going to the doctors, and they were getting injections and polio vaccine. And I just wanted to be like a normal kid. I wanted to get antibiotics. But he was really adamant that this was a dangerous way to treat the body, because he said the body always heals itself. The body is very intelligent, and these drugs are just killing the body and harming the delicate cells. So he was, like I said, little by little, incrementally, he was finding his way. And back then there was not Barnes & Noble where you could go to a big section on psychic or metaphysical section. He would have to get books imported from India or use books from London on metaphysics, and they would take 3-4 months to get here by sea. I mean, it was a very different time.
And as he's kind of exploring all of this, how aware are you in the family that he's doing this? Is this something that he was just kind of doing on the sly and nobody knew about, or were you all very aware that Dad was really trying to investigate all these alternative lifestyles?
Yeah, that's a great question. We were very aware, and on one hand, it was sort of embarrassing, and on the other hand, my mother at the time was very supportive because she thought, well, you know, if this is what her husband is interested in, and she admired him, and she thought he was a brilliant guy, then, you know, she's going to be supportive. I think where it really changed is once he started healing and our house became like Lourdes, with people knocking on the door at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning that, you know, their sister had a heart attack or the brother has leukemia or their baby suddenly went deaf. And it was literally like an emergency room. I think that's where the marriage sort of veered, because my mom was looking for a kind of stable environment to live, to raise me. And this was, you know, I won't say all hell was breaking loose, but, you know, it was really chaotic all of a sudden, with people coming to us or to my father for help, because, again, the context of the time, this was a time that there were no MRIs in existence. There were no CAT scans. There was no Lipitor. There was no bypass surgery. There were no stents. There was no, none of that stuff existed. So basically, if you had congestive heart failure or you had cancer, the doctors would kind of fool around and think they were treating you, but basically you went home to die. So the people that came to my father really were coming to him as a last resort, because the medical profession at the time really did not have anything in its toolkit to really help these people.
Well, I want to, before I get into the aspects of the deep healings that he was able to do and accomplish, I want to know, as he was doing this meditation and yoga, and he was kind of the forefront of this whole movement, would he start to experience and open up to the spirit realm? Is that when he started to realize there was a connection there?
I think he was always interested in it. I don't know that it was, you know, when he started with the yoga and the macrobiotics in the 60s, I don't know that I don't know that he knew that this was going to lead to his development of these really amazing healing and psychic abilities. I think he was just, like a lot of people, on a path and looking to expand his knowledge and his consciousness. And I think that little by little these things sort of came in and these opportunities presented themselves. And then the spirits started showing up, and then it was just that was the change that happened.
The fact that he could see the dead and communicate with the dead when they would come to him, was this at a time that he was not looking to make this connection? They were just showing up, or was it when he was in contact with somebody else and all of a sudden their spirits and, you know, loved ones and such would start popping up? The sequence was, he was always curious. He was curious about everything. This is a guy who really, he was an immigrant, and I think he went to 8th grade. That was it. He was not formally educated, but intensely curious about the world and science and other cultures, and just couldn't absorb enough information about things. And the big change, if we want to look at a landmark, he in the late 60s, he went to a lecture by a man named Arthur Ford, who was a very, very famous medium. And Arthur became world famous back in the 20s when Harry Houdini, the magician, just before he died, he told his widow, she wasn't his wife at the time, I'm going to give you a code, and it's comprised of letters, numbers, and words, and it makes no sense to anybody. But the code is decoded. I think it says it to Beth, I love you. That was the name of his wife. And he said, if anybody breaks this code, you'll know that I'm communicating to you from beyond the grave. Because he had gone to a lot of mediums and séances, and he thought they were all charlatans. And he did this as an experiment with his wife.
And she, at the time, back in the 20s, she had offered, I think, a $10,000 reward for anybody who would break this code. And no one could, but this guy, Arthur Ford, supposedly broke it. And through his spirit connections, some people said it was a fraud. Some people say no, but he became world famous, and he would hold séances at Carnegie Hall, or he would work with Gloria Swanson, the actress, or kings of Europe, in Greece, different countries. And he was originally from Florida, and he gave a lecture on, I think, reincarnation, and my father went there one day. And as my father walked in the hall, all the seats were taken, and he saw this woman sort of beckon him over, and he thought, oh, there's a seat next to her. And she looked up and she said to him, I see in your aura that you're a healer. And she says, I'm very sick. I have cancer, and I need you to heal me. And, this is during a lecture, and he just looked at her. He didn't know what she was talking about. And she said, put your hands on my shoulder. And he did, and he felt his hands just heat up. And he left them there, and when he took them away, they cooled down, and she said, thank you, I'm healed. And he walked around the room looking for a seat, and the same thing happened again. Another woman waved him over, and she said, I have a heart condition, and I can tell in your aura that you're a healer. And he had never thought about healing, didn't know anything about it. Same thing happened, and then this happened a third time. And that was it. I mean, that was what opened sort of the floodgates, and he was ready to go. And over time, he would develop different healing methods, and the spirits would eventually start to come to him. And when Arthur Ford died, that's when it really happened, because Arthur used a signal with my father. He would blink the lights 3 times. If we were in a restaurant and eating dinner, all of a sudden the lights would blink 3 times. And my father would say, oh, Arthur's here. And he would take out a napkin and start writing things down that Arthur was telling him about healing methods, or someone who was going to come see him. And this started happening. And then Arthur started bringing his dead buddies along. And they would talk to my father and teach him things. And every morning my father got up around 4 o'clock in the morning and started to take what he called spirit dictation. And he would write for about an hour, and these spirits would just talk to him and teach him. It was like a correspondence school. So that's really, that's the sort of shorthand answer as to how he got to where he was going.
And as this is developing for him, and you and your family are watching this, is there ever any question to his sanity, to what's going on, or because he's working in a place of all positivity and light, does it really even matter to anybody in that situation?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, while it was happening, he was still running his interior design business, and so there was this veneer of normality. I mean, it's like he went to work, and sometimes people would come in his office, and he'd look up and he'd say, you have an eye infection, or you're developing prostate cancer or something, and these people would just look at him, and he said, here, let me help you, and he would do his thing in the office, and word got out that there's this wacky decorator who's healing people. So it was kind of between normal and total weirdness, but it seemed to, everything was sort of stable, and then it sort of just opened up, and it really just took over his life, and he became like someone from another planet. I mean, his whole sense of reality shifted, and he was just understanding things in a way that sort of normal people can't understand. The interesting thing, I'm going to jump forward many years after he passed away, and I had started working on this book. The book took about 10 years to write, and I was in Miami, and I was walking, and I ran into a friend who is a medical doctor who I grew up with and was a close friend and knew my father, and we hadn't seen each other in like 20 years, and he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm starting to write this book about my father. And I said, I'm a little troubled because my father recorded everything. So we have tapes of his healings, of his phone calls, of his lectures. And I said, I'm listening to these tapes, and either my father was so amazingly out there and ahead of his time and had an ability that no one else had, or he was a total psychopath, because you start to listen, and now I'm listening to this material as an adult, and I'm thinking, even though I totally support my father and I believe what he did, but you start to listen to stuff and you think, holy cow, this guy's just psychotic, what he's saying. So it was only later.
Well, can you give me a little bit of give me a for instance on that? When you're saying these writings were kind of psychotic, what about them was standing out to you so much that really kind of gave you that feeling?
Well, it would be things like, for example, we're out to dinner, and this is not the writing per se, but all of a sudden he had one of his physicians and spirit physicians was named Dr. Hahn, who was like an eye specialist. And, he's talking to me about school. We're out to dinner and, what happened at school and in geography. And he'll say, excuse me a minute, and he'll say, yes. Okay, Dr. Hahn, what, they're coming tomorrow. And what's the problem? What do you want me to do with the, and he's talking to a dead guy while he's talking to me at dinner about school. And it's just seamless. I mean, it's just like there's someone else at the table. And to me, it was sort of normal at the time. And then when you look back, you think, oh boy. But it was real. I mean, it was totally real. And he did have this extraordinary ability. And his understanding of how, of us as energetic human beings, that we're not just physical bodies, but we have an etheric body and a spiritual body and a magnetic body. And all these different bodies can manifest illness before they hit the physical body. And he was always frustrated that doctors only recognize the physical body. And he said, cancer starts in the etheric body, the energetic bodies, long before it comes into the physical body. And if the doctors knew about these other bodies, they could actually be aware of and treat the cancer before it comes into the physical body, which is much better than the body doesn't get sick. And he would map these things out, and he would measure, for example, he has charts of every organ in the body, the heart, the eyes, the brain, and what is its optimal vibratory rate. What is it supposed to vibrate at? And when it's not vibrating at that, that's where illness sets in. And he would be able to, with a pendulum, the person didn't even have to be in the room. They could be in China. And someone calls up and says, my sister's sick. They don't know what's wrong. And he can go down and measure the vitality of every organ in this person's body and know where it's weak, where it's strong. And he can actually change the vibration rate so that it's all optimal and that it's operating perfectly, and then the illness is not there anymore. And the interesting thing about him with healing is, you go to a doctor and they'll give you medication and they'll say, you got to be on these antibiotics for 10 days. Because my father operated outside of time and not in the the rules of the material world, for him healing was instantaneous. So that when he healed you, that was it. I mean, there was a shift in the person's body, and the illness was gone. It didn't take 3 weeks to recover, or it didn't take 6 months of bed rest. It was just done because he had changed the energetic field within the person.
So he was this medical intuitive, so he had this amazing ability to do what even medical science wasn't able to do at that time. That's fascinating in itself, and the fact that he was able to diagnose, look into this. And you said he had no medical training or background, so when he's making these quotes and these diagnosis, he really is speaking from a place where he would not have any knowledge of this information.
Yeah, that's. I mean, someone with an 8th grade education doesn't know about these things. But he used he had several tools. But for example, he just had an anatomy book, and he would go down the anatomy book with a pointer and a pendulum, or just his fingers, and he would stop right where at the affected organ. And it's not that someone always came to him and said, I have liver cancer. They could come to him and say, I'm just not feeling well, and the doctors, don't know what's wrong with me. Because again, the diagnostic tools back then were pretty rudimentary. This is 60, let's see, if it was 40, 50 something, almost 60 years ago. And the doctors basically, if they thought something was wrong, if they thought you had cancer, they would determine that there might be a shadow on an X-ray, but that could have been anything. That could have been fatty tissue. That could have been calcium deposits, or they thought it would be cancer. And the only way they determined that was to actually cut you open and do what they called exploratory surgery. Now we have MRIs and CAT scans, but the thing is, he could know that. He could locate the tumor and the size of the tumor and where it was and how long it had been there within a minute and a half. I mean, he didn't need all that machinery. And it's interesting that we, as humans, we will trust, a box made out of plastic that you plug into a wall. We'll trust that. An EKG or any of that stuff, or a blood test or any of that, we'll trust that much more than an intuitive human being. And the body is the most miraculous machine ever invented. I mean, there's nothing that comes close to how we operate. The fact that you eat an apple, or you eat a steak, or you eat McDonald's, or you eat a bagel, or you drink a cup of coffee, and somehow your body turns that into energy to keep your heart beating, to keep you breathing, to keep your thoughts that you see in Technicolor. Right. I mean, we go to the movies and we say, wow, that was a 3D movie. We see in 3D all day long. And so he really had his faith in the miracle of the body.
That's remarkable. I thought it was funny, as a little aside, reading in your little bio here, it said that growing up with a guy like this was kind of tough. When you have a father who psychically knows everything that's going on around you, and you're kind of surrounded by these invisible spirits, you said they kind of acted like nagging relatives. So they were always kind of tattling or giving your dad a heads up if you were off to some kind of shenanigans.
Yeah, let's put it this way. I was not an ideal kid. I was growing up in the 60s, and that was a time when people were experimenting with everything. And I was doing that. And the problem was, part of it, the thrill is doing it behind your parents' back. Well, there was no behind my father's back. He knew exactly what I was doing at any time. And, there was a moment when I was taking some soft drugs, and I wanted to hide them. So I dug a hole in the backyard, and I put them like in a little Tupperware or a Band-Aid box, and I buried them in a hole in the backyard, so that I knew that, there was my stuff when I wanted it. And of course, the next day, that stuff was dug up, and it was sitting on my desk at home, just sitting there, like, to let me know. He never said anything, but it was, I know what you're doing. Don't do this again. So it was like I was that little model of the transparent guy,
right.
Where you see all the organs.
Right.
He saw right through me. He knew exactly what I was doing.
Was that stressful as an environment for you? Even though you said your dad was kind of a goof, he was a lovable goof and kind of, just an amazing kind of lunacy about this. But did that add a lot of stress and pressure for you to grow up in the shadow of a man that had all of these abilities?
I think it would have been stressful for anybody, but what made it more complicated for me was, again, this was a time where people like my father were seen as the devil or communists. I mean, he would get arrested for practicing medicine without a license. So he was seen as someone like a lunatic. They wanted to commit this guy to an insane asylum. So it's not like today, because today if I was 14 and my father was a healer and I was hanging out with my friends and we were at a football game or we were at the mall and what does your father do? Oh, he's a psychic healer. Wow, dude, that's cool. That's not what you heard in the 60s. It was like they went home and told their parents and the police showed up at the house. So it was stressful enough being transparent to your father, and then it was quadrupled by the fact that there was no other role model, and I felt like I was the only kid in the world that had this wacky father from Mars, basically.
Did your family have anyone else that had even the slightest inkling of these kind of abilities, or was this solely a gift to your father?
I've never been asked that question. It's a really interesting question, and not to my knowledge. I know that my mother's family thought he was totally nuts, but when her mother became ill and the doctors were, the diagnosis was really dire. And my father said, no, they're wrong. She's not going to die. She needs to do this, this, and this, and she'll come home. And she did. I think that sort of changed everything because he saved, their mother. And so that opened it up. But not to my knowledge does anybody else have any of these abilities. This is something that, when I go through his dictation and his papers, apparently there's a long lineage of his past lives leading up to this. For example, there was one message from Arthur Ford that apparently my father was in 14th century Persia, and he was a talisman maker. He made lucky charms that would bring good luck to people. So I think it's if you want to get into karma and reincarnation, I think it's just this was his destiny.
What an amazing series of events to occur to a man. And did he take these things in stride? Would he be upset that people looked at him as though he was crazy, or that your mother's family kind of treated him off until he was able to cure her mom? What was he like during all of the kind of tribulations of this time?
I think there's some people that take the high road, and I think he did because he felt that he was here for a purpose, and once he was on this path, nothing was going to stop him. So he just, the kind of noise of life, he just ignored it, and he knew that people thought he was nuts. And that's why he recorded everything. He had a little cassette tape recorder, and he was recording everything specifically for the purpose to have a record. And what was interesting, when I finally, after he had passed on, and I decided to write this book, it was an enormous task. And like I said, it took 10 years because he left behind so many audio tapes and so much writing. And when I had finished the book and sent it off to the publisher, I was done, and I'm starting to clean up the apartment, which was basically turned into a library about my father, and I'm putting everything back in boxes, and I came across one folder of these written messages that I had never seen before, and I thought, oh boy, I hope I didn't miss something important, because I try to make the book very accurate to his life, and I wanted to represent him as best as possible. And in it, there was a message. This was written in 1971, and I wrote the book starting around, I think, 1990. And it said, you need to organize your papers because Philip is going to write a book about your work, and you want to have everything, organized for him.
Wow.
And I read this, and I thought, I thought this book was my idea, but I was just the secretary. And then the final thing is that while I'm doing the cleanup, I had kept all his audio cassettes organized, and I'd put them in Ziploc bags and labeled them. And I came across one bag that had 5 or 6 cassettes in it that were just blank. And I thought, oh, he never used these. I was going to throw them out. And at the time, I had a cassette player in the car. So I thought, let me just listen to them while I'm in the car and make sure that they're empty. And 3 or 4 of them were. And then one of them was a reading that he had with a psychic, also 1971. This woman had a British accent. And she said to him, you have a son? And he said, yes. And she said, you need to organize your papers because he's going to write, and, I called it a memoir, but she said it's kind of like a documentary about your work. And she said, I see television cameras around this, and, make sure you organize your papers. So, again, I wrote the book, but maybe I didn't.
That makes you think twice about the whole idea of free will, doesn't it? It's almost like it was predestined. They knew this was coming, and they set that ball in motion for you. And it's not like your father ever said, someday you should carry this on and share my story.
No. And then numerologists have said, not knowing anything about me or my father, they said, well, I had one reading years ago. She said, well, you were specifically born to these parents for a reason. And, your father had a story that needed to be told. And while he was the sort of thinker and the creative guy, you're very organized. And there was a reason that you came into his life was to tell his story. And she didn't even know I had written a book. So you peel back the layers of the onion and it gets really complicated.
That is, wow, that's phenomenal. I'm curious now. Your father was a medical intuitive. He had all of the spiritual realm kind of surrounding him and helping him. He had medical assistance from the other side. Did he foresee his own death and illness?
No, and it's interesting. He, when my father died, he died very suddenly. And something made me very uncomfortable about his death because I had just seen him 2 weeks earlier. And when I went into the house, he was living with this woman at the time who I really didn't know. And my father didn't take any medication. And I saw a bottle of Synthroid, which is a thyroid medication, which is generally benign, but if you had a previous heart attack, it can induce cardiac arrest. And he had a heart attack in the late 50s. So I looked at this bottle, and it had been sold 3 days before his death for 100 tablets, and when I opened it, there were 3 tablets. And I thought, and it was made out, the prescription was for this woman he was living with, and I thought, gee, that's strange. So I called the pharmacist, and he said, and I was young at the time, so I wasn't as smart then as I am now. And the pharmacist said, yes, I filled it. And I called the police, and I said, I think there may have been foul play in my father's death. And the police just didn't want to hear it. And I said, can we do an autopsy? And they refused. They said, well, that medicine would be metabolized and we can't find it, which I later found out is totally not true. They can find anything they want to find. So a couple of years later, I went to a psychic in New York, and he said, your father didn't have to die. And he said there was something like a mix-up in medication or something, and something went really wrong, but he wasn't supposed to die. And, that was the feeling I had when I was in the house. And then in the last couple of years, I've been working with this amazing woman who's just a genius of a medium. And I called her for our first session. I didn't say anything. And for 45 minutes, my father talked about how he had been murdered by this woman. He went into great details. And apparently this woman, according to the medium, put this medication in a smoothie, because my father had this mango apple smoothie every day. And he drank it, and it induced a heart attack. And he went into such explicit detail with this medium. And the other guy, 10 years earlier, kind of told me the same thing, and it was my intuition when I was in the house that something was not right. And in this last conversation with the medium, and he was talking about he had she had put this medication in his drink. He said, when you walked in the house after I had died, and you were holding the bottle in your hand and you were wondering about it, I was just yelling at you, telling you what had happened. He says, but you didn't know how to hear me. And but he said, you need to listen. You need to know how to hear me now, because it's really important that I communicate with you. So to answer your question, I don't think he had any sense that this was coming. And my father had if he had one weakness, he loved women, and he just put them on a pedestal, and they could do no wrong. And, he didn't always have aside from my mother, he didn't always have the best women in his life. So I don't think he knew this was coming.
Astounding. We need to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Walking Through Walls. Our guest this evening, Philip Smith, here on Beyond the Darkness.
Beyond the Darkness.
Welcome back. This is the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Hey, listen, guys, I've got some copies of my DVD Paranormal Challenge available. And if you like Ghost Adventures, you love the Paranormal TV series, then you definitely want to pick this one up. It was a mini-series we did on Travel Channel a few years back with Zach Baggins from Ghost Adventures and myself, as we would take two paranormal teams, pit them against each other in different well-known haunted locations to see how well they knew the history, the use of their equipment, and what they would call paranormal evidence and what they would present to us. We had a great time. We had a lot of great guest judges that would come on the show, almost like a Paranormal American Idol, giving them a chance to see what they could do. And we got some amazing evidence and some really weird things that unfolded on camera in front of an international audience with this. So if you're interested in getting the entire miniseries, all 3 DVDs in one set, I'll autograph the set. It's $30. I also have a copy of my book, The Other Side, A Guide to Ghost Hunting and the Paranormal. Those are only $10. If you're interested in both, $40, $3.95 shipping and handling, I believe it is. If you'd like to get that and take advantage of it, you can email me, dave@darknessradio.com. That's dave@darknessradio.com. We'll send you out an invoice. You can pay that, and you can get either the DVD set, the book, or you can get both of them. We've got them available and shipping this week. We hope everybody had a very healthy, happy, safe holiday weekend. We're glad that you're back with us. Our guest is Philip Smith. His book is Walking Through Walls, a memoir, where he is recounting his father's incredible life and his own dealing with these abilities and the things that his father was doing. Your dad goes from being an interior decorator, kind of the toast of the town, and working for some really high-profile names. Once he starts pulling out these abilities, did the celebrities that he worked for, did they start coming to him for medical or mediumistic issues as well?
No, I think that it was, today, again, it's like black and white versus color TV. I mean, that was a black and white time, and if a celebrity went to a healer, they would be shunned. It would be as if they were being called a communist. It was just not done. I do know that there were, once my father left his business, he did help certain celebrities with certain, minor illness and things. But basically, he just helped regular people, and he never charged. That was sort of the amazing thing, is that he suddenly, we went from this jet set life of, weekends in the Bahamas or Jamaica, or, when Cuba was open, Cuba, and to a life of almost near poverty, because he just stopped making money and just wanted to help people.
That's an amazing life, and what an amazing gift he had and was willing to share with others. Talk to me a little bit. I know in the write-up about your book and about your life, you lived in this household where there were séances, talking spirits, exorcisms, and those things were daily occurrences. When there would be séances, talk to me a little bit about that. Who was coming there? Who was asking for these séances? And would your father lead them? And were you witness to some of them?
Yeah, he had there was a small community in Miami at the time of people who were interested in paranormal, but it was a really, really small community. And so these people would come over to the house, or we would go to someone's house, and we would have these seances, and they were not that impressive. Where my father really developed his ability, as I said earlier, was when Arthur Ford died, and he could start talking to Arthur, and Arthur started bringing in other people. So my father really didn't need group seances. He was just chatting with these dead people any time of day, and they would make their presence known and talk to him and communicate. For example, if someone was coming over for a healing, they may show up before the person and said, this person has kidney cancer or a blocked kidney, and here's what needs to happen. And the interesting thing I wanted to mention is that it wasn't always the cause of these illnesses. In my father's ideas, were not always physical. A lot of times they were maybe mental. And for example, he was able to do, let's say, psychology. Instead of spending 10 years with a therapist, he could basically in 10, 15 minutes get to the root cause of something, a disease, through someone's mental state. An example might be a woman comes to him with breast cancer, and he would take out his pendulum, and he would ask if it was in the etheric body or if it was in the emotional body. And let's say it was in the emotional body. And he would sort of ask, is there a date attached to this? And he might get the date of, May 1, 1948. And he would say to the woman, I'm getting this date, May 1, 1948. Does that mean anything to you? And because somehow this is connected with your disease. And she'd say, that's the day that my father physically abused me or raped me or whatever. And he said, well, this is the cause of your cancer, and we need to erase this, and what he would call the memory of the memory, that just kept replaying itself subconsciously and causing this illness. But he was able, through his abilities, to pick up on that date and to pick up on the cause, that this was not a virus, or this was actually an emotional event that was causing this illness. So he worked on a lot of different levels, both the physical and the emotional and the psychological.
That's pretty astounding. So something like a childhood trauma would end up manifesting itself into a disease or even cancer?
Correct. Correct. He studied the work. There's a guy who was an English surgeon many years ago named Edward Bach, and he basically felt that I think he was working in the 20s or 30s, that surgery was very primitive. Cutting open the body was sort of barbaric in a way, and there had to be a better way to do these things. And what he did was he went into the fields and he would pick flowers and he would hold them in his hand and sort of figure out what these flowers were good for. And they all worked on an emotional level. And so he created this whole system of let's say I don't know, impatience or the chamomile or crabapple, and he would then determine what these plants, what emotions they govern, maybe lack of self-worth or depression or egotism or narcissism, and he would use these plants to balance the emotional aspect of someone in an effort to heal disease. This was an English surgeon who now felt there was another way to do this, and my father incorporated some of that into his work, but he was able to get to the emotional origin of the disease, if that was in fact the reason for the disease, excuse me, through his pendulum or through the Bach flower remedies. So my father worked on many modalities, and it wasn't like really today's medicine. You basically, if you go to a doctor, I would bet 99% of the time you don't walk out of that doctor's office without a prescription, and that's it. And they don't counsel you. They don't ask, how are you sleeping? Is your marriage okay? They don't ask any questions. It's really cut and dry, and it's one size fits all. You have high cholesterol. Here's Lipitor, and in fact, I think I don't know the exact number, but maybe 50% of the people who have heart attacks actually have normal cholesterol levels. So this cholesterol idea is not necessarily the reason people are having heart attacks. And again, it's because we are these multidimensional energetic beings. And, when we go to a doctor, and it's the way they're trained, it's not their fault. They see us like we're a car, and you have to change this pipe or change the oil, and you're going to be fine. When in fact, we're so subtle and we're so complicated, and we're going to find out. It may take another 100 years, but we're going to find out that the way medicine today is practiced is pretty primitive, and that the body has its own intelligence and is so sophisticated, and that the way we treat it is really like we're in kindergarten compared to the sophistication of the body.
I need to know, Philip. I mean, your father pretty much outlined for you the pathway he took to this gift and to these series of gifts. It's your bloodline. It's a legacy. Have you ever thought of trying to follow in your father's footsteps and awaken that part of you so that you can continue the work that your father did?
That's the $1 million question. When I talk to him through the medium, he almost uses the exact words you just used. He said, "You have my DNA. I taught you everything. You have this ability just like I do." And he does want me to, do this work. And I think that what has prevented me up until recently was growing up when I grew up with him and seeing the harassment and the police bothering him and what he went through. It wasn't easy. It was not. He had no respect, and he was always in danger because people thought he was evil doing these things. And Miami at the time was actually when I was growing up was the Deep South. It was segregated, and they would think my father was the devil or black magic, or I mean, it was just ridiculous.
Right, but that was a different time and a different era. We're in a much more enlightened and open era now, where there are people, on every corner that have abilities or claiming to have abilities, and you've got people that are more open than ever to seek help and counsel, and probably need it more now than ever because of the way our world and our civilization has gone. I don't think you would, of course you're always going to raise an eyebrow or two, and that's just going to be a part of reality no matter when. But I think this would be the time to be most open, because the world is the most open for this.
And you're absolutely right. And I've been involved in a project for the last couple of years, and it's coming to an end. And I've sort of promised myself and promised my father that I'm going to I'm going to sit down and get to work. And one of the things he's asked me to do repeatedly in these sessions with the medium is he wants me to write a book about his work and how he did what he did. His idea is that he says people in your world need this information because the doctors are very limited in what they can do, and they need to know that there are other tools available to them. And when he was here, all he wanted to do, was teach people how to do this, and he wanted doctors to not hate him, but to actually say, look, here's another tool for your toolkit. We can, when medicine fails, you might want to try this path. And what people forget, 250,000, 250,000 people die every year from medical errors. That's far more than terrorism, and God knows the budget we spend on terrorism. That's far more than anything else. And, medicine does a lot of wonderful things. It's also not perfect. And they need to open the doors and have other ideas. And doctors need to become what they should be, and that is healers, because that's their job and that's their responsibility. And it's not there to deal with insurance claims and to just, shove dangerous medicines on people and to not care about their patients. They're supposed to be healing. It's a very noble profession, and I think we've lost that. And I'm hoping I've started the book, but I'll be able to spend a lot more time on it. And I'm hoping that, as my father wished, that this will help people and open the doors. And I need to do more work on this as well and help more people. You're right.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to, please understand, I'm not trying to call you out on this at all either. I understand your trepidation in having watched what your father went through on all of this. But like I said, boy, to know that ability, that innate ability might be within you. And what was it like to be there and witness people come in and seeing them disregard their crutches or their wheelchairs? I mean, this is something from Hollywood movies. You saw this unfold before your eyes. What was the impact of that like on your life?
Again, a really great question. And I think that, listen, I was a teenager, and like all teenagers, it's like, oh, yeah, that's what my father does. So part of it was I was not impressed, but I think on a deeper level, I think it was a very, very powerful impression, and I think it deeply shaped who I am as a person, and it made me see that the world is not as simple as we think it is. It's not just this material world, but we're surrounded by these forces and fields and magnetic energies, and anything is possible. And just because the doctors say, this is an incurable disease, well, it may be incurable to them, but that doesn't mean that it can't be fixed, because the body is so miraculous. So I think that the impact that my father's work had on me was who I became as a person. at the time it was, I knew not to talk about it because as soon as I talked about it, there'd be problems. The parents would call the police or they would call the school and tell the school, Philip's talking, about the work of the devil. You've got to, it was just a very different time then. So I think that it had two effects on me.
Completely understandable. I get that. What a remarkable time to be alive, though, to watch that open up and know that there was that kind of possibility or capability within people. With this book, do you outline, the steps that your father took to achieve this level of consciousness so that others may be able to follow in that line as well?
The book it's really a narrative. It's a memoir. It's stories. It's actually very funny to read because sort of the perspective is of this, kid growing up with this wacky father and really how he saw how strange this was. But people have told me that it has opened their eyes and they've taken up pendulum work or they've gone on to study healing. We talk about how he progressed along his path and how things presented themselves to him or things he would study. I didn't go into really the nitty-gritty how-tos of things, but like in some of his pendulum work, I would take you through healings because basically they were on his tape recordings, and I just transcribed them and put them in the book. I wanted to jump back to what you had asked me previously about what it was like. It's interesting because I have a friend now who's very interested in this topic, and it's as surprising to him as it is to me. And we talk about things a lot, and he's sort of progressing on his path really, really nicely and very, very quickly. And I said to him, it's so wonderful to have you talk about these things with me because basically I've kept quiet my whole life. I finally wrote the book after all those years, but these are things that my father trained me, taught me, I witnessed, but I've never really talked about them with other people. And partly through this friendship, I'm talking about him more and helping him, and it's now making me realize that there is this wealth of information there and wealth of material that probably is my responsibility to share with people.
It's something I think would help make a marked difference, especially when you've got that kind of response from people. And you had people from around the world that would come to visit your father to deal with this. Have you spoken to any of the people that he healed and worked with to see what the long-term effect was?
Yes. And, and again, there was a hiatus. My father left us in 1981, and it was like 20 years later I started working on the book. But some of the people he trained a few people, and some of the people he had healed were still alive. And apparently, in talking to them, that it was life-changing to know my father or to work with them. It set them on a whole different path and a whole different perspective as to how they saw life, and it fundamentally changed who they were as people. It was that powerful. And
that's great. What a legacy.
And I think that given where we are today in the world, we need this light, we need this sunshine, and we need a better way than where we're going. It's just madness what's going on out there, and we're supposed to be evolving, and we're supposed to have higher consciousness, and it looks like we're just going backwards. And I sort of feel that might be part of the role I need to play, is to bring this information to people so that hopefully we can reset our compass and just get to a higher place.
When you were growing up with your father having all of these abilities and living in this kind of abstract life that was so different than everybody else around you, what were some of the fondest and funniest memories you had of your dad's abilities and the things that would take place in your house?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I look back on it all with fondness now, and I feel that I'm very grateful that I had him as my father, but I feel I was sort of a brat to not appreciate him more, but I think that's what kids do with their parents. We had amazing times. I mean, when he would discover something and he would sit down and show me what he was doing, or I would go to lectures with him and watch him talk to people. And, you know, generally people came out of curiosity, but I think it was too weird for them. And you know, I would be a little bit hurt by that, but I wanted my father to be well received. But I think that when he would do things like in the very beginning, when he was first developing his abilities, he had learned, and this is in the book, he had learned when he was first learning sort of mind control, he had learned what may be sort of a trick. He was able to pick a cloud and direct his mental energy to it and cut a hole in it so that it looked like a donut. So I was really young at the time. I was maybe 10, and we would go in the backyard, and he would, you know, in Miami they have these big cumulus clouds that are like big balls of cotton, and he would tell me to it was like a game. He would tell me to pick a cloud, and he said, "You sure you want that cloud?" And I said, "Yes, pick that cloud." And he says, "Where do you want me to put the hole?" I said, "Put it just right over there." And it would take, you know, 5, 6, 7 minutes, and he would just concentrate. And then the cloud would just, like it was yawning, would just open up this hole right where I had pointed to. And, you know, that's how he was as a father. I mean, he was not someone to take me to a football game or to, you know, to do what other fathers did. This is what he did with me, was show me these abilities. And they were magical. It was just, you know, but I also knew I was an only child. And like I said, the pressures from the outside world, it's not something that I really shared with anybody. I didn't say to my girlfriend, "Hey, come over, watch my father put a hole in the cloud." Because I knew you just couldn't do that.
And you know, it's interesting that you mentioned that. I've heard people have recommended to me on other occasions, when you're trying to develop kind of these psychic abilities, focusing on clouds and changing them. And I've heard about blowing the hole through them or erasing them. I've heard this has been a skill, and it sounds ridiculous and silly, but here, this was exactly what your father was doing.
Yes, and this was, I would say this is probably like 1963, 1964 he was doing this. And it was, he wasn't healing at the time. He was just starting to develop his abilities. But imagine, you know, doing this with your father. I mean,
right.
It's an extraordinary experience.
Yeah,
and I'm so glad that other people, that you validated that, because when I tell people this, they just kind of like, you know, roll their eyes. But thank you for chiming in and letting me know that you've heard of this before.
Oh yeah, that's been a very big thing in a lot of people's accounts to me about their involvement in the supernatural and in kind of developing their abilities. It's in those kind of moments when they, you know, it's something that's small, it's something that they can use their concentration level on, and it's fascinating you bring that up. You know, I had a very strange experience in Trout Lake, Washington with clouds when we were looking to the sky. You know, it's a very well-known UFO ranch. And while looking to the sky, I noticed a very funny lenticular-shaped UFO cloud. It looked like a 1950s style UFO. the cloud itself, saucer with the dome on top. And I told my friend, I said, boy, that's got to be the stupidest UFO ever to hide inside a UFO-shaped cloud. And as I said that, this black ball started to undulate underneath this
Oh my God!
this cloud. It would come in and out. And we looked at each other. I'm like, did you just see that? And she said, yeah. And as we focused on it, you could see this going on. And then the weirder part of the night came when we heard that there was bad weather coming. And the guy that runs the property says, don't worry, they're going to keep it clear for us. And I said, who's they? And he said, the visitors. They're going to keep the skies clear. And I was shaking my head. I got to tell you, Philip, I'm like, okay, sure they are. Philip, the damnedest thing I've ever seen. There was a huge hole in the cloud cover over this man's property. It was thick clouds. You couldn't see anywhere except for over his property, this huge hole cut in the clouds. And there were hundreds of these hippies out there for this UFO enlightenment retreat. And as people faded in the night and started to go to sleep, the cloud cover got smaller and smaller. And then I remember looking up, and it was a very small hole up in the sky, and I looked down, and I'm talking to the friends I'm with. I said, well, maybe we should get ready to turn in too. And they said, okay. We look back up, and it's complete solid clouds. In the moments it took us to talk to one another, and it was just a matter of a few seconds, we looked up, the entire sky covered. But there was no wind. There was nothing going on. It was just such a strange deal. But there it was again. The clouds were moving and being manipulated and stayed open because of the intention of the people that were there to witness this. That is a pretty remarkable first step. So maybe that is something people should try.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it first of all, it doesn't cost anything, and you may not get it right away. I mean,
right.
Michael Phelps didn't become an Olympic swimmer the first time he jumped in a pool. And this is an ability that my father believed. He would say, what I can do, you can do. He believed we all have this. We're all miraculous beings, and it's just a question of intention and focus and practice.
Right.
And I love the story that you just told me because, you ask a little bit how my father growing up influenced. I believe we live in a miraculous world, and unfortunately the news and people's negativity makes us feel that we live in a horrible, dangerous, evil place, when in fact there are all these miracles happening every day. And I would like people to focus on that. And I think if all of us could, it's like turning the TV channel. You can watch the news, or you can watch a comedy, or you can watch an old movie. And if we could just change our channels and stay away from the negativity and focus on the UFOs in the clouds, or the love that's emanating from someone, or someone's kindness, or the fact that our heart is beating and we're not, we didn't even plug in the battery like our phones to recharge it. I think that that's what we all need to do. And if we could just practice that every day, I think it would start elevating the consciousness everywhere. And it all has to start with us.
I couldn't agree more with you. Thank you so much for coming on to share your stories with us, Philip, and your father's remarkable life. And I know that you're currently shopping his story around, and I hope that people will get a chance to see it either on the big screen or as a series on one of the networks, because I think this is a fascinating life that could inspire people to be more than they ever thought they could be.
Well, Dave, thank you for this wonderful, wonderful opportunity to share this information. I really, really appreciate it.
The book is out and available, kind of a mix between Running with Scissors meets Bewitched. It's an irresistible memoir. Philip Smith describes growing up in the 1960s Miami with his decorator father, who, again, one day discovers he has the miraculous power to talk to the dead and heal the sick. For a much more in-depth look into this story, you can find it at our website. If you just go check out darknessradio.com and click on the Killer Deals link, all the information is there for you to examine for yourself. That's it for tonight. Remember to go check out our True Crime Tuesday episode. We've got an amazing episode going today, and I think you guys are going to really like this. It is a strange case that involves a mysterious smog over London in 1952 that claims the lives of over 12,000 people. All the while, hidden within this fog is a serial killer on the loose. It is a remarkable story you're going to need to hear to believe for yourself. You can subscribe, and it's very easy. Just go to darknessradio.com and click on the True Crime Tuesday banner. $5 a month gets you 4 brand new episodes every month of the best in true crime talk radio. Go sign up. Never miss another minute in the best in true crime talk radio. True Crime Tuesday. Every Tuesday, you get brand new episodes and you get access to all of our past episodes for just $5 a month. That's only $1.25 an episode. Come on, there's nothing better you can do with that $1.25 than get even more of your favorites with Dave and Tim. Plus, we have dumb crimes, stupid criminals, I Knew a Murderer, and other bizarre topics that we cover. So check it out and subscribe right now. We'll be back tomorrow with more of the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness.